The estate stood like a monument to silence, its towering stone walls casting long shadows that seemed to swallow warmth before it could settle. Within those walls lived Duke Alaric, a man whose reputation for discipline and emotional detachment preceded him in every room. Servants moved carefully in his presence, their voices lowered, their footsteps measured, as though even sound itself required permission to exist. Into this rigid world arrived Lady, a bride chosen not for love but for alliance, her soft demeanor and quiet grace stark against the cold grandeur of her new home. Entered the estate with hope she barely allowed herself to acknowledge. She understood her marriage was arranged, yet she believed kindness might grow where affection did not yet exist. Her first days were spent learning the rhythms of the household, memorizing the expectations placed upon her, and searching for some trace of warmth in her husband's distant gaze. Alaric, however, treated her with formal politeness at best, acknowledging her presence only when duty demanded it, his tone never cruel but never kind enough to invite closeness. Their interactions remained brief and hollow, composed of necessity rather than intention. Meals were taken in silence, the clink of cutlery echoing louder than conversation, tried in small ways to bridge the distance, asking about estate matters, offering gentle observations, attempting to understand his world, but her efforts were met with curt replies or quiet dismissal. Alaric saw her not as a partner, but as an obligation fulfilled, a requirement of his title rather than a companion of his choosing. It was during one such evening, beneath the dim glow of chandeliers, that the fragile illusion carried finally shattered. A minor misunderstanding regarding household arrangements prompted a brief exchange, her voice hesitant but sincere. Alaric's response was immediate and unyielding, his words delivered with chilling indifference. "You'll sleep in the kitchen, I don't love you." The statement was not raised in anger but spoken with the finality of a verdict, leaving no room for protest or interpretation. Did not argue, the quiet dignity she possessed refused to beg for what was not freely given. She simply nodded, her expression composed even as something within her shifted irreversibly. That night she carried her belongings to the kitchen, a place meant for servants, not a duchess. The stone floor was cold, the air heavy with the lingering scent of meals long cleared away, yet she settled there without complaint, folding her grief into silence as carefully as she folded her clothes. In the days that followed, adapted to her new reality with a resilience that went largely unseen. She rose before dawn, ensuring the household ran smoothly, attending to matters that fell between duty and neglect. She listened to servants, offered help where she could, and quietly corrected inefficiencies that others overlooked. Her presence became woven into the functioning of the estate, subtle yet essential, though few recognized the extent of her contributions. Maurice, her personal maid, remained the only person who truly saw her. Loyal and perceptive, Maurice struggled to mask her concern, often urging to demand better treatment. Would respond with a gentle smile, one that carried more weariness than comfort. She did not seek confrontation, nor did she believe it would change anything. Instead, she chose endurance, holding on to a quiet belief that dignity did not require recognition to exist. Meanwhile, Lady Seraphine moved through the estate with effortless confidence, her presence a stark contrast to subdued existence. Close to Alaric and well-versed in the subtleties of influence, Seraphine reinforced the distance between husband and wife with carefully placed remarks and knowing glances. She never openly insulted, yet her words carried an edge that shaped perception, ensuring remained an outsider in her own home. Alaric, for his part, remained largely unaware of the depth of quiet suffering. He justified his behavior through the rigid beliefs instilled in him since childhood, where emotion was weakness and attachment a liability. His late mother's gentle teachings had long been buried beneath years of discipline, leaving him with a narrow understanding of strength that excluded compassion. To him, silence was acceptance, her compliance a confirmation that nothing more was required of him. Yet the estate itself began to reflect a subtle shift, one that Alaric could not immediately name. Though everything appeared in order, there was an intangible difference, a quiet tension that lingered in the spaces occupied. Servants grew more attentive, their respect for her evident in small, unspoken gestures. The kitchen, once merely functional, became a place of quiet refuge, its warmth shaped not by fire but by her presence. One evening, as the household settled into its usual stillness, stood alone in that kitchen, her hands resting lightly against the wooden table. The weight of her reality pressed in around her, no longer something she could soften with hope. She understood then, with a clarity that left no room for illusion, that she was entirely alone within the life she had been given. The realization did not break her, but it changed her, settling deep within her heart like a truth she could no longer ignore. The rhythm of the estate continued with outward precision, yet beneath its polished surface, something essential had begun to fray, though no one named it aloud. Lady moved through her duties with the same quiet diligence, but a subtle shift had taken root within her, steady and irreversible. She no longer searched for warmth in Duke Alaric's presence, nor did she measure her worth against his indifference. Instead, she carried herself with a calm detachment, as though she had already begun to loosen her place within the life surrounding her. Each morning she rose before the first light touched the stone corridors, ensuring every detail of the household aligned with expectations that were never spoken yet always enforced. The servants relied on her without realizing it, their tasks flowing more smoothly under her quiet supervision. Mary's remained close, her concern deepening as she noticed the absence of even the faintest hope in his eyes. Where there had once been gentle persistence, there was now acceptance, not born of peace but of understanding. Alaric observed none of this with clarity. He noticed efficiency, order, and silence, all of which suited him. If anything, the estate appeared to function better than before, and he attributed this to discipline rather than the unseen labor of his wife. When their paths crossed, his acknowledgement remained minimal, a nod or a brief instruction, never an invitation to speak, responded with the same composed politeness, offering nothing that might invite further dismissal. Lady Seraphine, however, noticed everything. She watched with a calculating gaze, recognizing the quiet withdrawal not as defeat but as something more dangerous. Where desperation could be controlled, indifference could not. Seraphine adjusted her approach accordingly, her words becoming more pointed in private conversations with Alaric, each remark carefully chosen to reinforce the notion that its presence was unnecessary. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered faintly through the tall windows of Alaric's study, Seraphine stood beside him, her tone light yet deliberate. She spoke of alliances, of appearances, and of how a duchess who failed to command attention reflected poorly on the title itself. Her voice carried no overt malice, only suggestion, yet the implication was clear. Alaric listened without interruption, his expression unchanged, but he did not dismiss her words. Instead, he allowed them to settle, unchallenged, as though they aligned with thoughts he had never fully examined. To them passed by the partially opened door, her steps slowing as Seraphine's voice reached her. She did not intend to listen, yet she could not move away once she heard her own existence reduced to inconvenience. Seraphine's final remark lingered in the air with quiet certainty, suggesting that an annulment would resolve what she delicately termed an unsuitable union. The silence that followed was brief but decisive, for Alaric did not object. His lack of response spoke louder than any agreement. Remained still for only a moment longer before continuing down the corridor, her expression unchanged, though something within her settled into place with unmistakable clarity. There was no anger, no surge of grief, only the quiet confirmation of what she had long understood. Whatever fragile thread had once tied her to hope had finally given way, leaving behind a calm resolve that felt almost unfamiliar in its steadiness. That evening she returned to the kitchen as she always did, the familiar space offering a solitude she no longer resisted. Mary's found her there, noticing at once the difference in her posture, the absence of hesitation in her movements. When spoke, her voice carried a quiet certainty that stilled any immediate protest. She informed Mary's that she would be leaving, not in despair but with intention. The words were simple, yet they carried a finality that could not be mistaken. Mary's reacted with alarm, her loyalty clashing with fear of consequence, yet calm reasoning left little room for argument. She did not speak of escape as though it were reckless, but as though it were necessary, a step toward preserving what remained of herself. She asked only for discretion, not assistance, though Mary's knew she would offer both regardless of the risk. The bond between them, forged in silence and understanding, made refusal impossible. Through the night, prepared with quiet efficiency, taking only what she could carry without notice. She left behind everything that tied her to the title she had never truly held, choosing instead the uncertainty of freedom over the certainty of neglect. Before dawn, she wrote a letter, its contents measured and sincere, expressing neither blame nor bitterness. It was not a plea to be found, nor a declaration meant to wound, but a farewell shaped by dignity. As the first light crept across the horizon, stepped beyond the estate gates, her figure small against the vastness of the world waiting beyond. She did not look back, not out of defiance, but because there was nothing left within those walls that belonged to her. Mary's watched from a distance, her heart heavy yet resolute in her silence, understanding that this departure was not abandonment, but survival. The estate awakened as it always did, its routines unfolding with practiced precision, yet the absence at its center went unnoticed at first. Hours passed before questions began to surface, quiet at first, then edged with concern. Whence absence could no longer be dismissed, the search within the estate began, contained and controlled, as though her disappearance were a matter of misplaced order rather than something deeper. Alaric received the news with measured indifference, his initial response shaped by assumption rather than urgency. He dismissed the concern with the belief that she would return, that her absence was temporary, inconsequential. Yet when the letter was placed before him, its presence alone introduced something unfamiliar into his certainty. He glanced at it briefly, his expression unchanged, before setting it aside unread, as though its contents held no immediate importance. Still, as the day stretched on and the quiet order of the estate began to feel subtly incomplete, an unspoken question lingered beneath Alaric's composure, one he did not yet allow himself to confront, but could no longer entirely ignore. Days passed with an uneasy stillness settling over the estate, a quiet imbalance that no amount of routine could conceal. At first, Duke Alaric dismissed the absence of his wife as inconsequential, a temporary disruption that would correct itself without intervention. Yet the order he valued began to unravel in subtle, persistent ways that demanded acknowledgement. Tasks once completed without instruction were overlooked, schedules slipped, and the seamless efficiency he had taken for granted revealed itself to be neither natural nor self-sustaining. Servants moved with uncertainty, their confidence diminished in the absence of the quiet guidance they had relied upon without fully recognizing its source. Murmurs spread through the corridors, not of scandal, but of confusion, as small inconveniences accumulated into noticeable dysfunction. Alaric observed these changes with growing irritation, initially attributing them to carelessness, yet no reprimand seemed to restore the precision he expected. The estate, though still grand in appearance, felt subtly hollow, as though something essential had been removed. Maurice carried out her duties with measured composure, guarding his departure with unwavering loyalty. Her silence was not without cost, for she endured questioning with careful restraint, offering only what was necessary while revealing nothing of consequence. In her interactions with Alaric, she remained respectful, though an unspoken tension lingered, born of knowledge he did not yet possess. She watched him with a quiet intensity, waiting for the moment he would begin to understand what had been lost. That moment did not arrive suddenly, but through a gradual accumulation of realizations that resisted dismissal. Alaric found himself encountering traces of his presence in unexpected places, remnants of her influence embedded within the structure of the estate. Records she had maintained revealed discrepancies she had quietly resolved. Correspondence she had handled demonstrated a diplomacy he had never noticed, and decisions attributed to routine bore the mark of deliberate care. Each discovery unsettled him, not because of their complexity, but because of their consistency. The letter he had set aside remained on his desk, its presence increasingly difficult to ignore. One evening, as the fading light cast long shadows across the room, he reached for it with a reluctance he did not examine. The paper was unadorned, the handwriting steady and composed, reflecting the same restraint had carried in life. As he read, he found no accusation within its lines, no attempt to assign blame or evoke guilt. Instead, the words conveyed gratitude for what had been provided, acknowledgement of what had not, and a quiet farewell that asked for nothing in return. The absence of resentment unsettled him more than anger would have. He read the letter again, searching for something he might dismiss, some flaw that would allow him to maintain his distance, yet there was none. Had not condemned him, she had simply released him, and in doing so had removed the foundation upon which his indifference had rested. For the first time, he was forced to confront the possibility that his understanding of their marriage had been incomplete, shaped more by assumption than awareness. Memories surfaced unbidden, moments he had overlooked now sharpened by context. He recalled her presence at the edges of conversations, her quiet attempts to engage, the way she had adapted without complaint to conditions that should have provoked resistance. What he had interpreted as passivity now appeared as restraint. What he had dismissed as insignificance revealed itself as deliberate patience. The realization did not arrive as a single revelation, but as a steady erosion of certainty, leaving behind a discomfort he could neither name nor escape. His interactions with Lady Seraphine shifted as this awareness grew. Where he had once accepted her observations without question, he now examined them with a scrutiny that exposed their underlying intent. In a conversation that might once have passed without note, he detected the subtle manipulation in her tone, the way she framed absence as confirmation of inadequacy rather than consequence of neglect. For the first time, he challenged her, not with anger, but with a quiet firmness that disrupted the balance she had maintained. Seraphine responded with composed deflection, yet the shift in Alaric's perception could not be undone. The ease with which she dismissed now struck him as calculated, her influence less benign than he had believed. Though he did not confront her openly, a distance formed, deliberate and unmistakable, altering the dynamic that had once felt natural. In recognizing her role, he was forced to acknowledge his own, a realization that carried a weight he could not easily set aside. Beyond the estate's absence extended into the world without trace, leaving Alaric with no clear direction for action. Yet the idea of inaction, once so natural, now felt insufficient. The letter had not asked him to seek her, yet its quiet finality compelled him in ways he did not fully understand. He began to consider the possibility of finding her, not out of obligation, but from a need to resolve the disquiet that had taken root within him. This shift did not manifest as sudden determination, but as a series of small decisions that gradually altered his course. He reviewed records of travel, questioned merchants, and gathered fragments of information that might indicate her path. Each inquiry felt unfamiliar, his authority offering little advantage in matters that required patience rather than command. The process humbled him, exposing the limits of a power he had once considered absolute. In these efforts, he encountered individuals whose lives existed far removed from the structure he had known, their concerns immediate and tangible in ways his had never been. He listened more than he spoke, learning to ask rather than assume, each interaction shaping a perspective that had long remained undeveloped. Though these experiences did not erase his past actions, they began to redefine his understanding of responsibility, extending it beyond duty into something more personal. As weeks turned into months, the search yielded little certainty, yet Alaric persisted with a resolve that surprised even himself. The absence that had once seemed negligible had become a presence of its own, shaping his thoughts and guiding his actions. He no longer sought to restore what had been, for he had come to understand that it could not be reclaimed in its original form. Instead, he sought acknowledgement, an opportunity to confront what he had failed to see. One evening, as he reviewed a series of accounts in a modest town far from his estate, a detail emerged that caught his attention, a mention of a woman matching his description working quietly within a local clinic. The information was uncertain, offered without conviction, yet it was the first indication that felt tangible. He sat with it in silence, the weight of possibility settling heavily upon him, for the first time confronting not the challenge of finding her, but the reality of what might follow if he did. The town was modest in both scale and ambition, its narrow streets shaped more by necessity than design, yet it carried a quiet vitality that felt foreign to Duke Alaric. He moved through it without announcement, his presence unmarked by title, guided only by the fragile thread of information that had led him there. Each step felt deliberate, not from uncertainty of direction, but from the weight of what awaited him at its end. For the first time in his life, he approached something not as a duke accustomed to control, but as a man uncertain of his place. The clinic stood at the edge of the town, simple in structure yet steady in purpose. Its doors remained open, welcoming those in need without ceremony, a contrast to the guarded halls Alaric had always known. He paused before entering, his composure intact but strained by an unfamiliar hesitation. The journey had demanded persistence, yet this moment required something more difficult: confrontation without authority, apology without expectation. Inside, the air carried the faint scent of herbs and clean linen, the quiet murmur of voices reflecting care rather than command. Alaric's gaze moved across the room until it found her, and in that instant, the distance he had traveled seemed insignificant compared to the transformation before him. Lady stood near a patient's bedside, her movements steady, her expression calm, her presence defined not by absence but by quiet purpose. She did not look fragile, nor did she appear diminished by the life she had left behind. Instead, she seemed whole in a way he had never allowed her to be, her strength no longer concealed beneath restraint. When her eyes met his, there was recognition, but no shock, no visible disturbance to the composure she now carried with ease. She finished what she was doing before approaching him, her steps measured, her gaze unwavering. "Your Grace," she said, her voice respectful yet distant, the title sounding more like formality than connection. Alaric inclined his head slightly, the gesture stripped of its usual authority. He replied, her name unfamiliar on his tongue, as though it belonged to a language he had never learned to speak properly. For a moment, neither continued. The silence between them filled not with tension, but with the weight of what remained unresolved. "I did not expect you to come," she said at last, her tone even, offering no accusation, only acknowledgement. "I did not expect to understand why I should," he answered, his honesty unembellished, his voice carrying none of the detachment it once held. "But I do now, or at least I am beginning to." She regarded him quietly, as though measuring not his words but the intention behind them. "Understanding is not the same as change," she replied, her gaze steady. "No," he agreed, the simplicity of the admission marking a shift more profound than any defense he might have offered before. "It is not. I have spent much of my life believing that duty was enough, that fulfilling obligation absolved me of everything else. I was wrong." The words did not come easily, yet they were not forced. Each one carried the weight of recognition, shaped by reflection rather than impulse. Listened without interruption, her expression unchanged, though her attention remained fixed upon him. "I treated you as though your presence required no acknowledgement," he continued, his voice steady despite the discomfort it carried. "I dismissed what I did not care to see, and I allowed others to shape my perception when I should have formed it myself. I do not ask for forgiveness because I have not earned it. but I needed to say this, not as your duke, but as the man who failed you." The absence of justification left the air between them clear, free of the defenses that might have complicated what he offered. Lowered her gaze briefly, not in submission, but in consideration, as though weighing something internal rather than reacting to him directly. "I did not leave to be found," she said after a moment, her voice softer but no less certain. "I left because staying meant losing what remained of myself. What I have here may not be grand, but it is mine, and it was built without fear." "I see that," Alaric replied, his gaze steady, taking in the life she had created without him, "and I would not take it from you, even if I could." A quiet pause followed, not empty but reflective, allowing the truth of their words to settle without urgency. In that stillness, the imbalance that had once defined them no longer existed, replaced by something more uncertain, yet undeniably equal. "I cannot return to what was," said, lifting her gaze to meet his again. "Nor can I pretend that your presence no longer matters. Both things are true, and I will not ignore either." Alaric nodded once, accepting the complexity without attempting to simplify it. "Then I will remain," he said, not as a demand, but as an offering. "Not to reclaim what I lost, but to prove that I can be more than what I was." Her expression shifted slightly, not into warmth, but into something less guarded, as though his words had reached a place she had kept protected. "Time will decide that," she answered, her voice carrying neither promise nor rejection, not words. "That is fair," he said, the acceptance immediate, unforced. The moment did not resolve what lay between them, nor did it need to. Instead, it marked the beginning of something neither had anticipated, shaped not by obligation or expectation, but by choice. As turned to return to her work, and Alaric remained where he stood, the distance between them no longer felt like separation, but like space, one that could, with time and truth, be crossed.